Well, hello, everyone. It's your girl, Gabrielle. Welcome to a brand new episode of Hot Topics. Let me tell you what the show is about. So, this is a show where we like to have real talk about real things. This is not your celebrity hot topics. This is your educational hot topics. So, we've covered a variety of topics on this show. We've talked about robots taking our jobs. We've talked about hospice. We've talked about homeschooling, life as a tutor, mindset. What else? Mental health, physical health, chronic illnesses. We've covered a lot of different ground on our show, but all with the same purpose, which is to let me put it in another way. For you to be more informed than how you were before you came to the show. So we are here to impart knowledge on you. So we want you to leave this show with more in your brain than you did before you got here, because that's what we're all about here at Hot Topics. And today is an interesting conversation. I'm looking forward to see where we go with this. So let me tell you what the topic is for today. So the topic of the show today is faith and facts, the great debate. So that is the title of today's episode, Faith and Facts, the Great Debate. So we're going to have that conversation about science versus religion. So I'm looking forward to see where we go with this. And my guest who is going to help me out with this, I totally forgot his bio. But yeah, so my guest is going to help me out with this. He is actually a returning guest to the show, and his name is Daniel Tausan. And so I am going to just remind you about who he is. So let me do that for you. So who is Daniel Tausan? Well, let me tell you. So Daniel Tausan is a freelance scientist specializing in health and communication. He works with everyone from CEOs to everyday individuals, guiding them through what he calls practical longevity, or dissolving disease through applied biology. Daniel shares his scientific frameworks to help strengthen team cohesion, communication, and effectiveness for business and the everyday man. His approach centers on the end of one principle, where personalized health becomes a discovery of what's possible for you. He helps you uncover what works best and when, based on your unique biology, genetics, history, and purpose. Fabulous. All right, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Daniel to the stage. Hello, Daniel. How's it going?
It's good to be back. Good to see you.
Awesome. Thank you for coming back on the show. All right. So let's get right into it. So let's have the discussion. So as a scientist, I would imagine the topic comes up about science versus religion. So want I'd like you to share your take on that. So I'm just gonna have you just dive right into it, and we'll just spitball from there. So tell us your take on that.
Absolutely. Yeah, we put the verses in there as a little bit of a hook. And you see it often. You've seen Bill Nye the Science Guy up against some preacher who's got the Bible in front of him, and we pin it against one another, science and religion. But I've worked with numerous biologists and biochemists, and a lot of them are religious. A lot of them have some faith that they practice, as that they're some of the brightest minds in the world, but even they see that they are either discovering or uncovering, whichever way you'd like to go about it, the framework and the fabric of existence. And so they have a reverence for it. Not necessarily that to say that there's some, bearded man in the sky that's, watching over them, but rather that there is some intelligence outside of what is simply stuck between our eyeballs. And so we put the verses there as a little bit of a, I think, dead end conversation, because the reality is that scientists helped uncover where religion is very much so aligned with what science is putting forward. Science being that tool, a way of thinking. And it's also helped uncover where religion went down a little bit of the dark road, where it started giving you things in which it had no basis to claim. And so I think this is a really good place to start, where the conversation really is that how has science helped overturn bad beliefs, and how has science helped align with reinforcing your faith in the things that matter and the things that help the human being rise to seeing more of God, the universe, to bring it into their life, to have a more fulfilled, more vibrant life where you are more of what you're meant to be, where you're actualizing more of the self and discovering who you are.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And then I guess the thing with science and religion is that they both want to explain why things exist, right? So particularly in Christianity, because I myself am a Christian, the Bible talks about the creation of the world, right? Literally in the first book of the Bible, it's how the world was created, um, and then how the animals were created and how humans were created, and like how man was made first and was made out of the dust of the earth, and then woman came second, and God put Adam to sleep and took off one of his ribs and used that to make woman. Um, so they both explain how things were created. I find science tries to put more details on that, but so I think they both try to give a sense of the world around us. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a very good point. What about some of these very like detail oriented scenarios where, hey, a woman is created from a man's rib? you know to say that out loud from a human perspective of what we're capable of, we're not capable of that. You can't take a rib of a man and make a woman. And so the first intuitive approach is this a metaphoric description of something else, or did we even get the translations correct? Was the rib the actual word, or was it supposed to be, Eve was created at the side of Adam? And so this is something that becomes very difficult, because if we get a few words wrong in translation, you're going to have a very big difference in what we're talking about. And so was rib the right translation would be my, contention there. And so science helps put things into perspective where, okay, if we can't make sense of this from, hey, there's no testable way to come to a conclusion, then you have to leave it at the person's, call it faith. If they would like that story, if they like that approach, that's okay. But we've stared into the cosmos, and the cosmos are old. They're very old. They're a lot older than, 3, 6, 10,000 years, 100,000 years. And we can see that. We see us, the human being itself, is somewhere between 500,000 to 1,000,000 years old. And so did we become more or less advanced as time went on? That's hard to say, but I don't think it invalidates the bigger pictures of what was shared within the texts. Because if you look, and you said it yourself, we are dust. I believe that's in Genesis. That's exactly what science has showcased, that we are the dust that comes from carbon, nitrogen, oxygen. And where is that formed in our universe? It's formed in stars. So technically we are all stardust. And so there is now, from where you had almost a poetic description, be very literal, and other parts where it's a little harder to make that jump. And so this is where science helps give some sort of framework in which to operate under, and say, was all of it that's presented us today in a, pure, as a complete unchanged fashion? And it might not be. And I think that's the important part, where God gave you an intellect, God gave you a will, and I think it's up to you to decide where the truth lies, or at least where you want to place your belief, and reserve truth to be able to be showcased to you through your life experience, right? And I think that part is something in which is up to the individual. I can't make it up for you. You know, you get to decide what authority is.
So now, where does the debate come from? Because there seems to be, well, let me ask it like this. Can science and religion coexist?
I think they do coexist quite beautifully, and the origin of where it's really been pit up against one another is that um, religion has often taken a zealous or a very wrong approach to certain things. And when I say religion, let's take example one that's really big, is that the idea that the earth is the center of the universe. Now, the earth is center for us because we're steering from it. But is it center of the universe? That makes no sense. We have no idea. Where are we within the grand cosmos? We don't even know how big it is. So, in that sense, it's a very important thing where science comes in and humbles some of the claims in which have gone awry. And they've gone awry tons of times, right? How often have we seen in numerous religions where disease was a thing of sin or punishment? But we know today that that's not sin or punishment. You're not being punished. It's you're learning how to be this using the vehicle that is the human body. If you are soul projecting this experience, you're learning about it, and it's about an aspect of growth. And so there's tons of time. Schizophrenics were considered full of demons. And you recognize, no, there is a neural wiring that has a certain outcome, and it might not be negative. It might be something in which is very sensitive to simple, very reasonable, articulable scenarios that are happening in our existence. There's the connotation, for example, of gender and reproduction. So at one point in time, there was considered that only the man would give the genetic, or call it the material, for life to flourish. The woman had no part in sharing, and call it in reproduction. The woman was but the vessel in which to carry life. But that's completely wrong. No, there's the egg and there's a sperm. There's genetic material is actually more slanted towards the egg, because the egg has mitochondria, and only mom gives mitochondria, and mitochondria has its own DNA. So technically, mom gives slightly more DNA than dad. And so that's completely wrong. And for how many different religions passed that on as sort of a bit of a twisting, a subversion of really what's going on. And it might never have been passed down in ways in which it was intended. And so a lot of this type of, I would say, bad beliefs that are erroneous, or that are almost destructive for your connection with the universe, right? And so let's give some definitions. When I say God, I would refer to the everything, all that you can experience, that would be God. And so if you're going down beliefs that are ego-centered, well, it's cutting you off from God. They're doing the opposite of helping you align with more of what life has to offer, more of God's, call it divine grace that's being given to all that are willing to accept. And how do you close yourself off? You close yourself off by having a belief that you've come up as a small little mammal navigating the world, scared and trying to control things, when in reality there is a need in order to be able to overcome this very useful programming, because you have to survive. If we're around a dinner table, I got to make sure I put food in my mouth and not someone else's, right? The ego is there as a servant, but a terrible master. And so this is where I think the origin really of pitting them up against one another, because religion has often been used to corral individuals into a certain type of ideology or belief structure that has been, I would say, oppressive or difficult for an individual to rise spiritually, mentally, economically, all these different ways. And so eventually the person rises and rebels against it, until they come back to a portion where, hey, this was really bad, but then eventually we'll turn back to some other faith. And I think that's something that's very important that we can touch on, is that you can't, as a human being, exist without faith in something. If you don't realize it, you'll put it in places in which might not warrant growth in a direction that'll be serving both for yourself and for others. It'll be, I would say, in the negative direction, negative polarities that will pull you away from, the better aspects of life. And so in many ways, science and religion have aligned completely. Beautifully, we mentioned the stardust, and how within the Bible, within Genesis, it mentions you are dust and you will return to dust. And this is exactly it. We share atoms, and so those atoms, the law of conservation of mass, falls in line with that concept. The other ideas there is that, from Hinduism and from the Eastern philosophies, there's still an idea, and I believe Christian too, that there is a start to the universe. God said, "Let there be light," and boom, from darkness, light emerged. And light is the principle in which here is, manifests, call it, our experience of matter and everything else, sound and light. But in this notion, there is some beginning, and it is call it a cyclical nature. Right? It's not this linearity that has been proposed previously. And science very much so showcases that there are massive cycles. And the religions talk about these massive cycles of how the cosmos and the universe unfolds. The numbers might not have meaning, but the notion that there's rhythms and there's cycles does. So this is a beautiful way in which, the religion and the science have come together. And imagine how difficult it would be to explain these unvisual. You can't visualize this as a man 4,000 years ago. You didn't have these incredible telescopes to give you what we have today, from the Hubble Space Telescope or from the James Webb Telescope, that have given you the insights really of what the cosmos looks like. And so the fact that the religions were able to, ahead of their time, showcase this really, I think, is impressive as to where they were getting the information from, how they got their information, what were they connected to. And so there's really interesting, I think, boundaries being pushed now with, especially in physics, that consciousness, the fact that consciousness is not an emergent property. It's not that, hey, you're a human being, and because you're a human being, consciousness therefore comes about in a randomness of call it a hollow universe. It is rather the opposite. Is that consciousness is present. It is a foundational property of the universe. And from it, a human being emerges, able to now experience that consciousness. And when we look at what science is beginning to showcase in that regard, it seems that it's a lot more favoring the notion that consciousness is the foundational aspect. It is present there with or without a human being to experience it, rather that it's through this vessel that you get to see a fractionated version of it, because it's so vast and massive. So I think there is in a lot to really go off of in terms of where it's aligned. And I think one of the most important ones is the golden rule, right? I think we teach this is, what is the golden rule, right? Do unto others as you'd wish to have something do unto you. And you find this principle in every doctrine, whether it's, what we call a religion, or we call it something like Buddhism, where it's more ideas of how to live. You find that golden rule. And very much so the science, reinforce or reaffirm that. Absolutely. From a scientific perspective, creatures that survive, that do very well on the planet, it's not the ones that dominate over everything else. It's the ones that are most cooperative, right? The most important creatures in existence are ones that are the most intertwined with everything else. And so because those creatures have a way in which they garner and take care of their surroundings, and which does so in reverberation of taking care back on yourself. And I think this is a very important rule, because as you do unto others, if you inflict harm and ill will upon an individual, and that individual then carries that forward, it's a perpetual cycle of, just a difficult, hellish environment. Whereas at any point in time when someone does, let's say, injustice towards you, you have the ability to what? Gain some type of insight from what we'd say is a space that doesn't exist in your immediate environment, recognizing that, hey, I want to do better. Where does that come from? Where does that, hey, I wish to do better, because if I do better onto others, more will come back towards me, because eventually it will be that major precedent, is what we feel as human beings, the compassion, the love, the care for what's around us. And so that isn't something in which comes out of science. We use science to describe the fact that human beings are compassionate. This is our default state. But where it comes from, I think that's where the religion comes in very handy, so that we keep seeking these questions. From religion, these questions are very important because it allows science to have a lens in which has an outcome that's favorable, because there is no, thou shall not kill. Science doesn't tell you whether you should kill or not. It's our morality that comes about and says we don't want that. And where does that come from? I think that's a very important question to ask, because then you understand that, like the ego is a good servant, science is a good tool.
Right. You said a mouthful there, absolutely. And I do like that what you said about, there's things that science does not that, religion does, like with morality, for example. And even with with religion, it is, I mean, I guess again, I keep coming back to Christianity, but it is very behavior focused, in that how you should treat other people, how you should treat yourself. Um, like you do unto others as you want them to do unto you, right? It's very relationship based and morality focused, behavior focused. Um, so I think science is more would it would just it's more like how things work. Um, I mean, there's like social sciences and sociology and the study of human behavior and psychology and things like that. But it's more like why things work on the science end, but religion is more of like, should you do that? Right? And what are the benefits and what are the rewards? So the two can the two, I personally agree that they complement each other, because science would explain why things happen, and religion is more like, should that happen? um, so they do work hand in hand, I think. But I also think you also have to discern between the two, because and especially when explaining it to kids, because I'm a Sunday school teacher, so when they see things like evolution, for example, right? Like, oh, man came out of monkeys and apes. Um, and but that's the science part, right? And then the religion is like, no, like God made animals first, then he made humans. That's it, right? And that, there's no crossover, right? Um, so now how do you handle things like that when schools are, I mean, there's supposed to be separation between church and state, but anyway, but schools, are teaching things like, um, they're teaching things like evolution, right? And but then, at home, kids are learning, like, no, God made animals and humans as two separate beings. So how would you address that conflict where what they're learning at home is one thing, and then what they're learning in school is another thing?
I think it's important for any individual to recognize that it's up to them to decide what version of the story that they want to go with. Because if you like the version of God made animals first and then people first, then that's, you decide that. And I would say the crux there is, don't stop being hungry for more information. Don't stop being hungry to ask the proper questions. If that's the case, show me something in which I can have, through my lived experience, a meaningful relationship with that information. And if I can't, then maybe that information, I'll revisit it and interpret it differently. Because what do we see from the evolutionary perspective is that, very well, you can take any approach. You can say that a divine being came about and said, hey, you know what? I'm going to accelerate and change animals so that they are capable of speaking. And the divine being said, boom, there it is. but the divine being still had to take some kind of form, physical form, to go and manipulate that. So did aliens come down and, you know, shift our genetic information so that we can come to our human form faster? Maybe. Was it just monkeys about and eating mushrooms and all these other ideas that eventually shifted and moved towards speaking? Maybe. Was it that there was a snap of a finger and it all just came into fruition? Maybe. But whatever version of it you want, the question is, what are you going to do about it? How are you going to go about reinforcing, sharing that information? Is it relevant, or is it just your belief you're trying to impose on somebody else? And so what do you have from today's day that you can look as information? You have genetics, and you can go about examining and interpreting your version of what you understand from genetics. The more you can get into it, the more that you can see that there is an interconnectedness in which the Bible speaks of between all creatures on this planet. And us as a mammal are still very much so not that far off from everything else. Heck, even to a tree, we can line up our genome and say, hey, about 40% of it lines up. So even a tree has something called the mitochondria, and it has a protein called the cytochrome C, and you have a cytochrome C, and you can line those up and say, hey, look, we have a very similar protein, even though that's a plant and I'm a human being. So we're clearly of the earth to some regard. And how much, call it divine intervention, was there in our creation? That's a fun take. But what do you do with that information moving forward? And is it so important for you to try and say, I'm going to hold on to this belief? Because if you're holding on to a belief, may it serve you. If it doesn't serve you, I don't think you need to hold on to that belief, because the biggest atrocities done on planet Earth, when we look at it, both historically and in today's day and age, are done on beliefs, especially on beliefs on my idea is superior to your idea and your idea needs to be gone from this world. And this is something I think is very dangerous. I think very important we don't make science into a religion. And then when we see that any religion takes this notion on, we can say, hey, this is going away from what really I think the nature of God is, of having that do unto others as to do unto me, and noticing that that isn't really in line with what was, call it the betterment for us as a species to be able to rise. You know, it's kind of it'd be a shame if we blow this planet up. I think it would be cosmically, we're being watched and saying, oh, look, are they going to figure it out? You know, they've been given all the tools and look what they're arguing about. You know, they can't even interpret text of a very simple nature, and look where they've gone. So I think it's very important that if there's meaning in that text of how animals were created and, you know, human beings were created, for you to take a step a little bit and just, why not observe how are beings brought into this world today in front of your eyes? How were you brought into this world today? Where were you before you were the human being? Were you anywhere? And if those questions help move things along in the right direction, it'll help clear up some of, call it, what seems to be very contrary ideas. Oh, you know, God created this. Well, in Notion, I think that's a very important thing to explore. And if you're interested in it, I think you'll always come to a conclusion that's worth sharing with the rest of us. Just saying, hey, look, I examined this text, because I personally loved viewing the New Testament as a biologist. When you go into it as a biologist, and a biologist colleague told me, view it as a lens of neurobiology, neurochemistry, consciousness, that is what it's attempting to share. And when you go through it, you're like, wow, no, there's full on sections in which is trying to describe to you the pineal gland, right? I believe it's in Matthew. It speaks of the pineal gland, never saying pineal gland, but it'll say the light of the body is in the eye. Just one eye, it's in the eye, you know, and therefore thy eye be single. It says that it's a single eye in it. And what is the single eye that is referred to in many of or call it the theologies or the mysticism? It's the third eye, right? It's our pineal gland. It is a light responsive organ. And so in this notion, I think it's very important to see how practical the Bible can be if we can interpret it. I think that's the part, because I've loved listening to different individuals' take on what it's attempting to share. Because there's stuff that's very practical, like you mentioned about behavior. It has a very practical one on how to treat widows, and say this is how you're supposed to treat a widow within your community. That seems almost super specific. And then it takes a very difficult jump in some passages where it's, what is it attempting to talk about? Is it talking about the brain? Is it talking about consciousness? Is it talking about meditation, how to free yourself from temptations? Is it talking about how to still yourself and how to be able to find silence, and through silence you receive grace? I think this is a very important thing to say. Stay curious in it. Keep talking about it rather than having a fixed notion. This is it. That's it. Nothing else. Stay in your lane and don't listen to anyone else's interpretation. I think that's a very small, centered, scared individual attempting to hold something in which, I would say, is any point in time is their attempt to connect with other beings to say, hey, this belief I have is something I'm struggling with. Can you take it on for me? And if you do, then I have more, I have an easier time with that belief. But if you don't, I'm going to be afraid, I'm going to run away. And I don't think that's, what's intended with these texts.
Yeah, and then you bring up a good point too. I think the f- the fact that it all comes down to people, right? Whether it's science or whether it's religion, it still comes down to people. It's still being put out by people and facilitated by people. And of course, it is subject to bias and it's subject to um, ego, ego, right? And conceits. And it has, and is, and it's subject to people that want to be right. And um, unfortunately, we have this um, mentality in amongst the human race where uh, there's right versus wrong, right? And I think and you were talking earlier about like wars that have been started over religion, right? Not just Christianity, but and I mean honestly that's how Christianity was born, right? Out of rebellion against Judaism. So it's and even in like the first several books of the Bible, it's people are being slaughtered just to because God is handing over the land to the Canaanites. So it's religion is rooted in, well, I don't want to say rooted in violence, but it's violence is a big part of it. It's a big part of Christianity. Um,
I think
so
I think there's something
yeah,
very important there that you mentioned, is that when there is an oppression, when there is someone else telling you you must believe in this, then there is a acceleration towards moving away from that oppression, in which then the human being battles and fights. So I think that's something that's very important to recognize, that throughout possibly the entirety of all of human history, whether we know it or not, is that principle stays the same. So if your beliefs and are being encroached on, the human being fights back, right? It's, you can think it's noble, but if you corner a rat, even a rat will fight back. And I think that is an innate principle of, call it God, in which we are designed in such a way in which we fight towards coming towards what we say is our truths, for the time, for whatever they are for the time, and a very important process. I know death and war are not, they're not pretty things, they're not great things, but they are part of this universe. And I think when you fight for your beliefs, when they are pure, when it's in a just manner, it's a very important way for the spiritual evolution of this planet. When today's, I don't think ever been more exciting time, because there is a process, what I would refer to as biospirituality. And it is this recognition that what is the commonality in every single one of what we would say religious doctrines. Let's throw Buddhism in this notion, even though it's not a religious doctrine, but it is this very much the notion of freedom. It was very much so what if you see in every single one, says, do not be afraid. Now, I don't necessarily love the notion of a do not be afraid, because we have the word afraid and we have a negative context to it. Rather, I like a positive. But regardless, there's still the notion in every single text of do not be afraid. And so I think this is very important, is something in which signifies that this is a process that is occurring through us as the beings, this growth in spiritual awareness, this growth, this interconnectedness of coming to a higher truth. And why, again, why it's so dangerous to put science as a religion is that it simply starts cutting you off from moving towards receiving more. We're like, what do the Christians say? Receive more grace, right? What are the other, gain enlightenment? These are all in the same notions of recognizing principles of, hey, I exist on a plane outside of the physical plane. The physical plane, in terms of scientifically speaking, physicality doesn't technically exist. It's a utility word because we are constantly in exchange with our environment. Whatever is physical is temporary. Diamond, that might be very long lasting and across thousands of years, it's still temporary. It's an exchange of atoms that eventually will go back and be in something else. And so this notion of fighting from an oppression coming out of scenarios, I think, is a cycle in which is very important to break eventually as human beings, for us to recognize the process that's occurring and then intervene together as a populace and society. Now, this is my personal experience from a younger age, being born in former Yugoslavia, where you had 3 different religions. I viewed as religion as the causal force that destroyed the country, and I blamed it, and I had a lot of resentment. And then it wasn't until, I was in my early 20s that I got very interested in the psychology of religion and seeing the different religions that are on the planet and actually reading and seeing what it has to offer. And nowhere in it, aside from a few maybe religions that have some very bad ideas, but nowhere in it does it go and tell you, hey, the guy on the other side of the mountain deserves to die, to go wage war on him. It's not that. It's the opposite. Don't do unto others as you have unto to you. Love your enemy as if thy neighbor. There's very much so the opposite of what I was expecting to find in these texts. And so how is it that so many individuals are hypnotized that in an era where they can showcase great compassion, they're still being put into war? And I think that is the notion where beer is a hand that is using religion as a tool, a manipulative tool, which is, I think, a very much so force that has pushed people away from the call it the churches and the other religions that are practiced, because there's this disdain for the misuse of it, and recognizing that it's people, it's very much so not what was in the actual notions of it. And it's, I think, a very, very important lesson for a person to learn about laziness and callousness, because you're just taking someone else's word for it. But don't take someone else's word for it. Go and take your time. Spend a portion of your life with this information and make it a part of you. And if you don't, I think that part is a bit of a waste, or a missed opportunity, because I think you can revisit, for example, the Bible, no matter what religion you're in, because it has some phenomenal information. It's both historic from the planet, as well as esoteric, and where you have to put your own interpretation, as well as super practical on how to behave. And I think these texts, whether it's Buddhists or even the Bhagavad Gita as a spiritual text, is extremely beneficial for you as a human being. It will very much so nurture your soul to recognize that I see the greater process that's happening. I see how individuals are using this in ways in which are subserving to the actual, call it, cosmic delivery of what God has to offer us, the grace, the bliss, the prosperity. And in so doing, when the majority of people have caught on to the process, now it can no longer occur in such a way, and we've escaped this cycle. I think that's a very important portion to recognize. And are we in the era? I really hope so. I would very much so like that war be not an option, as the majority of human beings can simply come and say, what is the grievances here? What is the notion? Who is the perpetrator? What is the belief that is leading this group astray, causing them to think that they're superior, causing them to think that this is the only action to take, and then intervening in that notion. And this is where I think, again, science and religion complement one another, is because when beliefs go awry, well, we have science where they showcase, say, hey, you're breaking down as a human being. Aggression, your neurology, your amygdala, all these biological processes, they're going in such a way in which showcases that you're the one in the wrong, how to say. And that morality is very interesting, that no matter where you're born on the planet, no matter what religion, innately the majority of us know what's right and wrong. Your organs tell you what's right and wrong. You have the sensations in your gut, in your sternum, in your heart, in your throat. innately what's right and wrong. And to me, I think that is really a scientific discovery. That's now we bring science to look at all the sensations, no matter who you are, what you are, you get born in with this knowledge of what it is. Where did that knowledge come from? Why is it entrained in us?
Absolutely. So, you brought it up twice that science should not become religion. Could you elaborate on that? Because I find that people turn to science as anti-religion, as atheism, or even agnosticism. So atheism, agnosticism, I find that people turn to science as a way to contradict religion. And then of course you have Scientology, right? I don't know if you have Scientology in Canada, but so how would you explain so I guess explain what you mean by science should not become religion when people use science to go against religion, or you have the actual Scientology. I don't even know the word. You have the entity that is Scientology. Um, how would you explain that?
Yeah, I'd say science is becoming a religion in some people's state, and what I mean by that is that they don't practice any faith, and they think that science is giving them all the answers. Now, can you pick up a book of science to guide you in this world? What would be the book? Right? What would be the doctrine that you're following in which saying this is the way I should behave? Because there's no book in science that tells you this. I mean, where you can pick up a psychology textbook and be like, all right, well, listen to this, theory on, your relationship to your parents and some wild off, you know, I guess, stream of ideas that are coming from some a psychologist. There is no single place in science where you say, okay, this is the way to follow life. Maybe you pick up a book on consciousness, but then you say, hey, this is not testable. So is it even science? So this notion of science as becoming a religion is very dangerous because you become almost lower. You become very much so an animal, right? What is the differentiating factor between a human being and an animal is that you have choice. You get to be a being. You can be whatever you want, where the creature is limited in doing its process. You as a human being can choose a number of them, a plethora more than what the creature can do. When you're saying science is now the way in which it's going to help me describe my greater connection into all of the universe, then you're always lagging behind, right? How long did it take us to discover DNA? How long did it take us to discover, heck, what's something that was recent? How when even in birth, that maybe too specific, but one that comes to my head is an astonishing discovery. When mom is pregnant, we can find that DNA the baby release goes into mom's brain. And now mom has actually baby brain in her brain. We only discovered that in the last 6 to 10 years. So you can't wait for science to tell you all about life. You're using science to describe life. And it becomes very dangerous when you start taking on ideas where it's not even scientific. Somebody will say, oh, human beings are just flesh bags. There's no such thing as a soul. There's no such thing as all this, call it other stuff that's very difficult to test, where it now disconnects you from the greater, call it, aspect of what it means to be a human being. Where does your morality come from if you're just following science as a doctrine? You don't have morality. Where do your ideas of novelty, of new, where are you going to discover things if you're just simply doing science? If the world is just random and has absolutely no order, no intelligence, then how on earth are you discovering anything in this incredibly intelligent, call it, sphere of reality that we're in? And it comes to a point where individuals will do themselves and others harm by taking science on as a religion. Because let's define religion here is a very simple, is a set of doctrines to believe in, a moral guidance and worship. But if we just look at that first part, it's going to be a set of principles to believe in. Science does what? Science gives you knowledge. You still have to have beliefs in something. You don't have to have many of them. I have a very simple belief. You should be kind to all creatures, right? Even even Buddha gives a mosquito a second chance, right? That's a bit of a joke there, but the notion that you don't know something's place in the web of life. And so don't just go around destroying everything because for whatever reason is you're not fond of it. It might be the basis on which the entire system is built on, and you go a bit and destroy not only it, but as a reverberation, you will destroy yourself because again, you are connected to your environment as intimately as your lungs are connected to the tree. You breathe in what it's expelling and it breathes in what you're expelling. So this notion of science becoming religion is very, very much so prevalent today. We see individuals are so quick to do absolute vile and destructive acts towards one another. And so you're not going to have a society because our laws are not built on science. Our laws are built on a moral code in which references and has God in our courtroom. We have God in the courtroom. Why? Because we need a place to be able to pull things in which aren't lagging behind. We would like to go in a direction which we can see with the mind's eye as human beings. Now, that we're waiting for science to be able to tell us, no, this is how you need to behave, or this is the right and wrong thing to do. Because again, right and wrong don't come from science. Heck, having right and wrong in science is a poor way to do science because you don't describe something as right and wrong. You describe something in terms of empirical value. You know, cholesterol being high is not a bad thing. Cholesterol being high is cholesterol being high because you want to describe the functions that are going along with it. Cholesterol being low, is that a good or bad thing? Well, you have to describe the functions that are going along with it. And that is science. It's very descriptive and it's very tedious. So when science never says, it's a human being that says, but when science says the earth is 14 or 13.8 billion years old, again, the correct way to state that is by measurements of light, the universe appears by the expansion principle to be of 13.8 billion years old, with the caveat that we're doing an extrapolation, and in which so doing, we cannot see and foresee anything else other than that linear association. So if there's any inflection point, we can't determine it. Now, that is a mouthful. That doesn't sound as convincing as the universe is 13.8 billion years old. But the scientific way of describing it would be to state how is it that you're coming to that conclusion, through what measurements, through what, call it, observations, through what empirical deductions you have used in order to be able to get to that conclusion. And in so doing, this isn't the ultimate truth to existence. This is your perception of a layer of what you can come forward and say, which is very important, so that we have something go off, so it's not just changing constantly. So I think this is an extreme importance, and not to get confuse science as a religion, because if you confuse science as a religion, you're not using science anymore. Our most important tool to help clear up, to help us see more of the universe. And if that becomes muddled, we're going to go reverse back in society. Right, where things are going to get a lot worse if people take on the notion of science as a religion, and they defer to, like you mentioned, as atheist or agnostic, though I'd say very different for agnostic. So I'll just address the atheist, where the notion of a no God and the notion of a God. Now, in this notion where it's described, as far as I understand, as a theist and a non-theist version of God, referring that it is an embodiment, a physical version of it, is a losing game in both directions, because one, science cannot disprove something without evidence. So saying that there isn't a God is much of an impossible feat of saying that there is God and saying, show me it. I want it to be here in some kind of physical form, when the joke of it all is that you're experiencing it. So the notion to take from the atheist point of view is a very difficult one. And the notion for it to take it from a theistic point of view is a very difficult one. The notion from it as an experiential point of view is, I think, the way in which you can build on something to go forward, and what I think the greater body of the scriptures are attempting to put within your preview as, call it, the embodiment of the experience in which to see God, experience God, and have God both in your heart and within your surroundings. So I think that's a long-winded answer, saying be very careful with taking on doctrines of science as if they're some type of life lessons to live by, Rather, use science as a means to be able to clarify your actions so that you're getting closer and closer to living a life in which is aligned with your greatest passions, your higher state of existence, in which brings you to more life. And the reason why I would suggest that we are in a very scary era is there's never been more use of psychotics, antipsychotics, of more antidepressants than ever in existence. And that doesn't sound like individuals are connecting to more of life. It sounds like they're very much so disconnected and hanging on by a thread. So, what is it that an individual needs to bring them back into fold? Well, it is a little bit of a sad state to say that, even places in the world that are third world countries have better rehabilitation programs because they're faith based. They're based in faith rather than through what we do here with some chemical or, I would say, very misguided interventions in which have terrible outcomes. Whereas the rehabilitation programs in other parts of the world that are faith based have astounding outcomes for how many individuals are back on their feet in the right direction, back within their communities, back with connecting to who they are as an individual, finding value, finding purpose. So those are some examples. Hopefully they give insights as to the state of where we are today, where science is, what it can go towards, and really how to use it.
Right. And then, what we were talking about in our last interview about science is constantly changing, um, because we as humans are constantly changing um, due to natural evolution, right? So, due to natural evolution, due to um, changes in diet and changes in the body structure due to like climate change and so science is constantly changing, and so when you take on science as a belief, you're constantly changing your beliefs, right? And that makes you unsteady spiritually. It also makes you unsteady mentally as well. Um, and then you don't really have that sense of peace. That is a principle of religion, which is peace. Um, and I think I was just thinking about, and I guess again with science being used as anti-religion, I think it's a falsehood that people will say something like, if we eliminate all religion, then there'll be peace in the world. That's a falsehood because humans are naturally violent. So, um,
I would argue against that.
yeah.
I don't
Oh,
think
okay.
human beings are naturally violent. So I think there's also a misconception with that, with how it's perpetuated with even with ideas like testosterone. High levels of testosterone in successful men, what does it look like? It looks like generosity. So men with high testosterone that are in a successful position that have a large social network are more generous. So I don't think human beings are just innately warlike and aggressive. I think quite the opposite. I think the majority prefer a scenario that is collaborative and building. But we get into cycles again, and we get into, I think, a power structure and through dynamics in which obviously we've been through these kind of warring scenarios where one culture builds up and another culture builds up, and then they go head to head because, again, it's not as easy for them to collaborate. And remember, nature is built on collaboration, not on domination. So I don't know whether the nature of man is just, hey, we're aggressive, we're greedy, we're all these things. I know it's easy to default to that because we see a subset of human beings choosing that as their outcomes. But when it's your time to face God, it will not suffice to say, my will was decided by other men, man, woman, it's same thing. But you'll have to answer for why your will was your will and why you went awry and whether you get another chance, or whether you go to salvation or you go to other directions, do you repeat the lessons? Do you start off at a better foot or a worse foot? And I think that's a very important process, because if we constantly have that belief that human being is evil, human being is greedy, human being is warlike, when we see a human, another human, this is the innate version of what's going to come up in our psyche. And I think the Bible tells you the exact opposite. I think most scriptures tell you the exact opposite. I think this is why it says when you see your enemy, see them as your friend. You might not get a chance within this lifetime to sit and have a cup of coffee with them. I don't think that's the, call it the end result. But when you see them as a friend, and you have to now just deal with the friend like a chess match. Yes, some of you might die on this, field one day, but within time, when you see them as your friend, you will then see realities. You will see possibilities. You will see timelines of how your two cultures coexist and move towards one direction. And in a world with no religion, I would say that the idea isn't that there isn't a religion, because human beings are religious. You do a practice of religiosity, because you will always, no matter how much you discover, this is known in the scientific field, you discover one thing, but now you have 10 more questions. You discover one next thing, and you have 10 more questions. So you're constantly having questions. So you're always expanding into the non-knowledge. I think this is a very important word. Why agnostic, I think, is a very hard thing to interpret for the era and for what they were saying, because I think there's a difference between knowledge and then non-knowledge, or agnosis, because it is knowledge of the unknown or the unknowable at the moment, which is different than not having knowledge, if that makes sense. So it's this understanding that I am on a boundary and I can't see past the boundary, but I know the boundary will move eventually. So I have a knowledge of the things that I can't know at the moment. Most in a scientific way, when we built the periodic table, we knew there were elements we were going to discover, and heck, we discovered them. And so that is agnosis. I think very different to how it's spun today. And if you take a look at through Seneca and some of these versions, they're very much so in the favor of very spiritual processes, into knowledge, into limiting themselves from their perspective and sharing what they can with the world. I think that is the notion when you say if there's no religion in the world. I think it's really saying that when our societies unify in really seeing God in the best form that we possibly can, where we're aligned in saying like, no, yeah, we have the principles. Here's some math we got together. Now, what more can we see? Here's my perspective. Here's your perspective. Oh, great. Hey, look, now we can enter a realm in which the human being can exist. And maybe a mental plane or other dimensions in which the human being is limited. And we know through our scientific instrumentation that we can get to more and more of, call it, what is present within our environment that we can't through our senses. So I think this is the notion of, call it, the idea where what is it if there's no religion? I don't think it's possible because of human beings being religious. We'll take this practice on no matter what state of existence that we come to, whatever pinnacle of society we come to. You'll always have more questions of what the universe really is.
Absolutely, absolutely. Listen, there's a lot that we didn't even get to. We didn't even talk about the afterlife, right?
Mm.
But we're gonna have to save that for another day, unfortunately. But um, but yes, I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to wind things down. So now, as I did in our last interview, and what I like to do on Hot Topics is I like to have my guests share words of wisdom with our audience. So, Daniel, do you have any words of wisdom you'd like to share?
Well, I would very much so put forward that there's two parts to human life. There's the first part where you're getting to know the self, and I will spill a little bit of the cosmic joke within that portion, is that you can never know yourself, right? Until you experience something, you may have an idea of what you will like and what you won't like and how you will act and won't act. But until you do it, you won't know. And so you are in a forever process of discovering the self. Now, the faster you get to that, the faster you get to the second portion of life, is that what are you going to do about it? What is it that you came to do? And you innately came to do something. And so don't get stuck in this notion of simply deciding of who you are, saying this is me and that's it, and limit yourself. Keep expanding, keep growing, keep learning, and very much so share your perspective in the most humble, most astute, most cunning, most direct and accurate of ways, so that you share your gift with the rest of us, as everyone has something of value to share.
Beautiful, beautiful. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you for coming on Hot Topics and thank you for having this discussion with me. This was awesome. We got to do this again. We didn't even, like I said, we didn't even get to like the nitty gritty, the afterlife. Where do we go when we die? We didn't even answer that part. Maybe next time we could do a part two to this. But yes, let's get to your promo. All right, so Daniel Tausan, haha. So he's all over the web, you guys. So you could go to his website. It is timelinesciences.com. So to learn more about what he does and all that he has to offer, you can go to his website. He is also on Instagram as Timeline Sciences. He is also on X as Timeline Science. So the S is the last S is missing, so make sure you guys pay attention to that. He also is on LinkedIn. It is his name, Daniel Tausan. And he's also on YouTube with his name as well, Daniel Tausan. So I encourage you guys to follow him across all of his social media. Reach out to him if you have any questions. Daniel, tell us about your business, what you have to offer.
Well, it's just exactly that. It's about science and about getting access to science. So I provide those services in which connect you with the greater body of work that exists, and very much so the biosciences realm. So though I do like some of the frameworks for science and presenting that in structures for groups and companies, really where you are with your health, where would you like to take it? Would you like the practical longevity and stay healthy and away from all the problems, or are you dealing with something and need that push in the right direction? The complete oversight to package your information and saying, hey, how do I approach the medical professionals? Hey, how do I get help from the right people? Hey, what tests should I order? I'm there for you to put it together and put you on the right track on the right timeline.
And you do one-on-one consultations, you do groups. How is that set up?
I do both. So one-on-one consultation is the primary ways of going about it, and simply working through me either through video or through text-based conversations, and then through groups, usually the organizer, the AHR, or the individuals that bring in the health services can bring me in to give conversations. The most popular one is from stress to strength, for how are you dealing with today's workload. If you're at a law firm, it's been a popular one, especially high stress scenarios. How do you take that stress and actually transform it so that you're growing rather than you feeling like you are unable to handle and your health is crippling? Because the belief in stress is more deadly than the stress itself.
And I think you also do like consultations about addressing health
Absolutely, yeah,
issues. Yeah,
yeah,
but with a scientific viewpoint.
absolutely. We bring that framework of the N of one. We can compare you to others, but recognizing that we can compare you also to yourself, and how are we going to go about finding what's correct and right for you? How do we interpret best your background and bringing in as much of the information as we can, and then taking that to um, um, the N of one approach, noticing that you might be in line with the general public in some regards, but if you're unique, what are you going to do about it? How will you work around it? If there is no information, what are you going to do about to have that testable way in which you know that you're going the right direction? Right? How are you going to set up your scientific framework so that you have confidence that the steps you're taking are to step towards the better version of yourself?
Okay, and you're virtual, in person. How does that work?
I am virtual, so I'm in Vancouver. So unless you're in the neighborhood, uh, then I am all virtual.
Oh, but you do in person as well.
I do house calls here in Vancouver. Yes.
Okay. Hey, listen, we're global. Okay. So, you never know. Someone in Vancouver can
If
be
they
listening right now.
Absolutely, if they also if someone wants to fly into Vancouver, if they need my assistance, more than happy to. I've been hired for many call it off the beaten path requests. such as going through someone's house and checking for their all the products that they're using, to various other, call it, assistances. I am a freelance scientist, so I welcome my use in terms of a scientist to give me access to things that maybe the average individual would, or average career path wouldn't. It's also broadened my horizons and also given me a greater scope of what I've had to learn.
All right, awesome, awesome, awesome. All right, you guys, so there you have it. So all of his contact information is scrolling below on the screen, the bottom of the screen right now, if you are watching this on video. But if you are listening on a podcast, the links are in the description. And I almost forgot about your freebie. So tell us about your freebie.
So there's a very important word that we use all the time, every single day. It's the word "you," and this is a little bit of an article of how the word science, or how science use the word "you," right, within the classrooms, within the universities, within the greater field, and really some of the, call it, deceptive notions that can be taken away when you misunderstand that word "you."
Absolutely. And it's an article. Is it
It's
what is
the
it?
it's a very short. It's a short read. It's about a 10-minute read, and it's a PDF document.
Okay, there you go. So it's a long link. I probably should shorten that. But it's a long link. So you guys, it's for you right there on the screen. But the link is also in the description for those listening on a podcast. All right. Well, Daniel, thank you for coming on Hot Topics yet again.
Another hot topic. I think we smashed. It was a pleasure to be here. Hope to see you again.
Yeah, awesome, awesome. All right, I will let you go. Adios. All right, you guys, and that is it. That is yet another episode of Hot Topics. It was actually pretty um no problem, no problem. Um yes, another episode of Hot Topics. Very, very, very interesting. I know I say the word interesting a lot, but it's very, let me think of some other words. It was very enlightening, very informative. Um, maybe a little challenging. I don't know. But I hope you guys got a lot from that. All right, so let me just do my little show and tell. All right, so Hot Topics is a production of my tutoring company, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So, you may, maybe you're a parent right now, you're listening or watching. Maybe you have a child right now who is just falling behind on turning in their homework, right? Or you see them struggling in class, or their promotion in doubt, or maybe it's not so negative. It's more of you just want, they can do better, right? You see them in the 70s and in the 80s, and you're like, I know you could do better. My child just needs a push, right? They're decent. They're a decent kid, but quote unquote decent, but I know they can do better. I want to push them further. So if you are a parent that's having those notions about your child, why don't you consider us? Consider our tutors. So let our tutors help your child get to that next level, get them on track, and or get them to that next level. So right now we focus on grades 3 to 12 in the younger grades, and we even do college as well. So third grade to college. So that is our general range. And in terms of what we offer, so we do in-person services and virtual. So in-person services are limited to our areas, our local areas, which is New York City and Nassau County, Nassau County, Long Island. So if you are looking for someone to come to you in person, if you happen to be within the New York City area, the five boroughs of New York City, the five boroughs, I should say, or Nassau County, consider, and if you want something in person or something on site, on site, as in going to a public library, for example. We do that within our local area. For those of you in Suffolk County, Long Island, at this time, we don't have anybody to come out in person. So I do encourage you guys to consider our virtual services. So we do have our virtual tutoring services. Even if you're in New York City, even if you're in Nassau County and you don't really want people all up in your space like that, we do virtual services as well. And our virtual services are across the United States. I do want to kind of emphasize that. So, across the United States for our virtual services. If you're looking for any of that stuff, let me tell you where you can learn more about that. You can go to our website. It is www.astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You can also find us on many social media platforms. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and YouTube. It is the name all in one, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. You can find us on X and TikTok. It is ASATS 2013. So make sure you catch that subtle difference. And Eventbrite and WhatsApp, it is our name with the spacing in between the words, A Step Ahead Tutoring Services. So make sure you guys pick up on that. But if for some reason you've missed any of this stuff, everything is on that website, which is once again www.astepAheadtutoringservices.com. You can go to our website, you can request a tutor, you can learn more about our services, everything that we have to offer. We do college counseling, test prep, collaborative editing and proofreading. We have workshops. So, all of these things, you can learn all about that on our website right now. And I also encourage you to follow me personally on social media. So my name is Gabrielle Crichlow. You could follow me personally on Facebook and Instagram. It is Gabrielle.Crichlow. So that is the account name. You could also follow me personally on LinkedIn. It is Gabrielle hyphen Crichlow. So make sure you catch those subtle punctuation differences, but I also encourage you to follow me personally as well on social media. So follow me professionally and follow me personally. And before I run, I want to take this moment to encourage you guys to leave your feedback about today's episode. Did you like it? Did you love it? Did you hate it? Do you have questions? Were there things that we didn't really address or whatever your feedback? I take all feedback, constructive feedback, that is. Um, or just or whatever, any kind of just whatever, any kind of feedback is fine. Preferably constructive. But just take 5 minutes of your time and leave your feedback in the comment section or in the comment thread on the side or down below. If you are listening on a podcast, depending on which platform, there are comment sections. So now Spotify has comment sections. There's also, of course, Apple Podcasts where you can leave your comments. There's Podchaser, there's Good Pods. So there's all these different platforms that are out there that you can leave your comments, and I encourage you to do just that. It does help us. The more feedback that you leave, the more that this episode will circulate on whatever platform that you are taking us in. Um, so the more comments you leave on Apple Podcasts, for example, the more that Apple Podcasts will recommend our podcast to other people on Apple Podcasts. So that is how the algorithm works. That is how the internet works. So the internet rewards popularity, unfortunately. So the more you comment, the more the episode will circulate in the particular platform and the more that it will circulate on the internet as a whole. So I can use the help, you guys. I definitely want this episode to spread. I want our podcast to spread. So just take 5 minutes of your time and leave your comments in comment section in the comment thread. Um, However medium that you are taking this in right now, just 5 minutes every time, you guys. That's all I'm asking. And do more than an emoji. More than an emoji. Give me a couple sentenences. Give me a couple sentences, you guys. So it'll help us out a lot. All right, and so that is it for Hot Topics. I look forward to you joining me on the next episode. Thank you guys. And now I am signing off. Bye.